Hello, welcome to Shad Life. I'm really going to need my coffee for this one. It's time to build an entirely new wheel with this hub. So that's what we're going to do today. Before we get to building it, I actually want to talk a little bit about boost spacing because now is an opportunity where I can show you why boost spacing became a thing. Let's get into it. Okay, so I have both hubs. I have the old hub, non-disc hub, and then I have the new disc hub. Both of these hubs are 100 millimeter width spacing. The reason I have it that way is because this fork that I got, this Identity Rebate XL, is 100 millimeter width spacing, right? Which is like what BMX bikes are, DJ, old, rigid forks anyway, things like that. If you get a DJ suspension fork with a through axle, it's going to usually be 110. So anyway, looking at these hubs, what I want to show is how when discs started to become a thing, you had to move the flange in, and look at how much more the flange is moved in for the disc hub versus the non-disc hub, right? And because of that, you actually have to dish your wheel. Dish means you have to have the rim centered more this way, meaning the spokes are at less of an angle on this side than they are on this side. Over with this hub, they're at equal angles, which gives you equal strength on both sides of the wheel. The dished wheel, it's a little bit weaker on the side that has less of an angle to it. So back when discs started to become standard and we were still running 100 millimeter width, you couldn't have as strong as a wheel, right? So then boost spacing was introduced, which gave us 110 millimeters width, which allows us to move this flange out with the disc and have it be more equal. That is basically, in a nutshell, why boost spacing exists. So if you ever wonder why they talk about boost spacing, it was basically made to accommodate the disc in the front wheel. In the rear wheel, boost spacing is even more. Now it's normally 148, right? It's pretty standard. And the reason that is because we went to 12 speed, so you got a wider cassette, and we have discs, so they went a little bit wider on the rear. They went from 135 to 148, and in the front, we went from 100 to 110. So hopefully that describes that. Let's get to building this wheel. One of the most important things when building a wheel is to get your starting point correct. The reason why is you have this valve. Now, if you look at the spokes closely, let's try not to have too busy of a background here in my messy thing. If you look here, this is where the two spokes cross and makes kind of a triangle. You do not want your valve stem here, because if it's here and you try to get a pump in there on the valve, the spokes are going to get in the way and it's going to be a pain in the butt. You technically could go here, but you have basically three spaces. So you got the tight space, and you got this one, which is, kind of in between, and then you have this one, which is where the spokes run almost parallel. That's where you want your valve stem. And then you have this one where they're starting to get less parallel, and then you have here. So you want to, and also for looks, you kind of want your wheel to match. If you look at the wheel, it just looks better when everything's kind of lined up, right? But you definitely want your valve stem here. And so where you start and how you start with your wheel build is extremely important, and I will show you that here. So it technically doesn't matter which side you start with. You could start with the disc side or non-disc side, doesn't matter. And I always start with an inside spokes. And this is actually, inside spoke comes from this way. Because you come from the outside to create an inside spoke. So see how that works? So it's kind of opposite of what you might think. So now that's your starting point. You basically want to start with one spoke, right? And then you grab a nipple, stick it in your mouth, find your valve hole right there, right? And then I'm going to put this to the left of the valve hole, stick it all the way through, and put this nipple on there. Now I'm gonna, every time I put a nipple on when I'm building a wheel, I'm gonna screw it on until I see just like maybe a couple of threads. And I'm gonna try to keep it, I wanna keep it relatively loose, so I don't wanna go all the way to the threads because I know that'll make the rim kind of tight. And I don't want it to get tight yet until I start truing. So there is your starting point. So just a quick recap, now that I have it on there. You want the spoke to start on the inside, and you want to go one hole over from the left of your valve stem hole, and that's your starting point. And you want to start with all inside spokes. So for every hole you go in the hub on the inside, you want to skip a hole. So you want to go every other hole inside spoke. And then on this side, because you have to put spokes from the other side of the hub, so even though you're doing every other here, you want to do every 4 on the rim. You also want to check your rim and make sure that the spoke holes, I'll show you really quick, is on the spoke holes aren't perfectly centered on the rim. One is to the left, this one's to the right. So that's why I want this one to be on the left side. So there's a lot of initial mistakes you can make right at the beginning. And if you make that mistake, like let's say I put this on the right side of the valve hole, then I'd be pulling on the holes that are designed for the other side of the hub. So again, look closely and you'll notice that these holes, this is for this side of the hub, this is for that side, or this side of the wheel, yeah, that side of the hub, this side of the hub, right? They alternate. So you just want to make sure you're paying attention to those small details at the very beginning, because once you start, you just follow a pattern and everything falls into place. The other thing is this hub is going to rotate this way. Notice how the spoke moves away from the valve hole when I turn the hub, because the hub is going to get twisted in the wheel, right? If I twist the hub this way, guess what's going to happen once I build the wheel? I'm going to end up with that tight cross right where my valve hole is. That's what I don't want. So you got to make sure the hub twists to the left. So start to the left of the valve hole, twist the hub to the left of the valve hole. You won't need to worry about what direction the hub twists until you start the spokes, the outside spokes on this side, which I will show you in a moment. My second spoke is going to go one hole over, so I'm going to skip a hole, go in like that, and then I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, and then go to the 4th hole, right? And then I'm going to thread the nipple on there. And again, I'm going to try to match how many threads I have showing on this to this spoke, so they're about equal. Get it on camera here. So I have the nipple threaded on there, and I'm exposing about the same amount of threads for both spokes. And keep in mind this hub's going to turn this way. So it's very important you follow this pattern. So you skip a hole here, you skip 3 holes there. So you should see 3 holes. You can double check, make sure you're on the right hole on this side of the rim. So these first few steps are extremely important. So now I'm going to go lace all of the inside spokes for this side of the wheel. Then I'm going to lace all the inside spokes for the other side of the wheel. And the reason I do all the insides first is because they're much easier to do. If you do the outside spokes first, then it gets really hard to put the inside spokes in, and you got to bend them and tweak them around to get them in. So do all your inside spokes first, then do your outside spokes. All right, this is another really important part to get right. I'm starting to spoke the inside spokes on the opposite side of the hub. So that's going to come from the outside and come out the inside and go up. This is where this hub is going to get turned, right? And so in order to get this correct, Notice that the holes on this side of the hub don't perfectly line up with the holes on the other side of the hub. They're a little offset. So this spoke, when you put it in, you want to put it in on the hole just to the right of your opposing spoke next to the valve hole. I always work from the valve hole over, right? So now I know I can turn this spoke in the opposite direction, right? And another thing you can always do here, if you get confused, is go look at another built wheel that's been built by a professional or by a complete bike, and you'll usually be able to figure this out. But we want to go 11 holes from where this, reference spoke is by the valve hole. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And so that's this spoke hole. You'll know if it's the right one or not because it should be on the opposite side, right? Offset to that side. And then you got to twist the hub, get this through there, and get the hub as twisted as you can, and then get your nipple on there. This might be, if I can't, I can poke it all the way through, so I'm good. When I get to the point where I can't poke the spoke all the way through to put the nipple on, that's when I will start using my other spoke so I don't drop the nipple into the rim. So now what I've done is I've actually started my twisting already just by starting the other side. So let me get this in there and kind of repeat this because it's important that you get this correct. Okay, so that spoke is there. It's next to this one. So we'll just go over this again. This is my reference spoke next to the valve hole, right? Now I look across the hub, make sure I put the opposite side spoke one hole over to the right of this hole, right? And then I cross it over the count of 11 and put it in the 11th hole over here. And then to make sure you're in the right hole, look at it this way and make sure this is on that side of the rim. If it goes in a hole on here, you know you're not in the correct spot. Now we just follow a pattern. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side as I did on this side. Every other hole and every 3 spaces. And I'll be able to follow each spoke on that side will follow each one of these spokes on this side. So it's pretty straightforward. So I'm well underway, but one thing I do often, and I'm glad I do it, is I always check my work as I go along. I re-verify that I'm doing the spokes correctly, that I'm following the patterns correctly. And on this one, what I noticed was my last 2 spokes coming around to the valve, these 2, I actually somehow went 4 holes here and then here, and I noticed that this one was too close. And so because I was verifying my work constantly, I was like, oh, I need to correct those 2. So I was easily able to correct them. And now I can be rest assured the rest of this build is going to go. So even with as many times as I've built wheels, I still make mistakes. And because I make mistakes, I'm always verifying my work. And so now when I'm doing this opposite side, I've put 3 spokes in and I want to just verify that I'm doing it correctly before I get too far along in the process. So I go and I look at for my valve hole, right? And then I see my opposite spoke spokes going this way, right? And make sure they're all correctly going in line where they need to go. So very important to just kind of double check your work as you're going along. Put in like 2 or 3 spokes and then verify that you're doing everything correctly, that everything's lining up correctly, because now is the time to make corrections, not later on when you're close to done and you realize, oh crap, I missed a couple of spokes. It's really easy to make mistakes when doing this. So that's why I bring this up, is always be double checking as you go along. I mean, I build wheels quite often, but I'm not as proficient at it as I used to be because I don't do it like I don't work in a bike shop anymore. I'm not doing it all the time. So I slow down a little bit, make sure I'm doing it correctly, because I'm not really in a hurry. So there you go. I'm going to finish this side and then I'll show you the outside spokes. So because this is a double wall rim and I'm getting to that point where I can't poke the spokes all the way through, this is where I use this technique where I use a spare spoke to feed the nipple through the hole. The reason I do that is with double wall rims, I don't want the spoke nipple falling between the rim walls because it's really challenging to get it out of there. So using a spare spoke as a guide to guide the nipple in is the best way to do that I've found. Okay, so there you go. All the inside spokes are done. And don't worry about, like, sometimes you have to bend the spokes a little bit, but they're gonna be plenty fine. These spokes are used too. I took them out of the other wheel. But you're gonna have so much tension on these spokes that this little bit of bending you see sometimes isn't a big deal. Yeah, if it's got a major bend in it, then you don't want to use it, but little bends like that are fine. So I did all the inside spokes on one side, then the other side. So now the hub is where it needs to be. I don't have to worry about any other thing about crossing or anything. Now I can just start throwing the outside spokes in, and now they're going to be easy because the outside spoke's going to go outside. We're doing 3 cross, so it's going to go outside the 2 inside spokes and then get tucked underneath the other inside spoke, the last inside spoke. So it goes over 2, under 1, and then it goes into the next hole over. So that makes it super easy, because if you were trying to tuck these underneath outside spokes, it'd be very difficult to tuck underneath when they're so tight. But when you're out here, it's really easy to tuck underneath the spoke. Okay, so now we're gonna start on the outside. So you gotta thread the spoke from the inside so it pops out the outside like this, right? And then it's pretty simple now, because you just gotta go over, over, under. And this first one you're going over immediately, right? Then your next one you're going over a little further up, and then you go under this spoke. So you go over, over, and then under. So see how easy it is to just tweak the spoke under there. Then you go to the valve hole that is on this side of the rim, or you skip a hole past that spoke, whichever way you want to look at it. But you want to definitely make sure you're on the correct hole that's on the correct side of the rim when you put this in. So that's how it's going to look, and you just continue this pattern. The next one, we come in from behind. This is pretty tight tolerance, so I gotta bend the spoke a little bit to get the threads to pop through. Right? So once you get it through, you go over, over, under, and then skip a hole here. And it goes right in there. Again, you can always double check, making sure you're on the correct rim hole on this side of the rim, right? And then put your nipple in there. Okay, so that entire side is done. You can look at it, looks like a normal spoked wheel, right? Now we got this side to do. All the outside spokes on this side, and you basically do the exact same thing you did on the other side. So I'll just finish lacing up this wheel and we'll take a look at it. Okay, so there you have it. Completely built wheel. I can always check my work, but notice how the valve holes right here in that space that I talked about at the very beginning. Everything looks good, right? And once these get tensioned up, they'll be all nice and straight and tight. I keep it pretty loose when I do this, because this will help with the truing process, which I'll do in the next video. But you can see it's fairly even. It's got a bit of a hop. It's kind of wobbly, so Part of the truing process is at the very start, I try to get everything kind of equalized and get the rim fairly centered before I even start really tightening things, because it just makes the truing part, the tightening and truing part, a lot easier if you start out in a good place. So what I'll do now is I'll go and verify that I go over, under on these spokes on all of them, and then yeah, just make sure it's well done. Cool. It's looking good so far. So there you have it. That is how you build a wheel. Honestly, because I was filming at my workbench, I don't know how good at angles I got to kind of show what I needed to show. But one of the things that you can do as you're building a wheel is just find a wheel that is already built and try to copy it and use it as a reference to make sure you're doing it right. Appreciate your support for my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace.